Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Campaigning resumed today after the shocking murder of Jo Cox, and I hope that you will agree that the best tribute to Jo Cox and to her commitment to democracy would be for these important issues for our future to be debated thoroughly from now until the vote on Thursday. And that's what we intend to do here on Question Time tonight. Our audience is divided evenly between those who want to remain and those who want to leave, and with some still trying to make up their minds. And as always on Question Time, Mr. Cameron has not seen any of the questions in advance, doesn't know what he's going to be asked. So would you welcome the Prime Minister, David Cameron. Thank you very much. Right, Prime Minister, our first question comes from Jo Cox, please. Adam Bardi. What a terrible thing to say. Adam Bardi.
Mr. Cameron, has this referendum soured the political debate in this nation in light of the tragic murder of Jo Cox?
Well, first of all, let me say, how shocked I think the whole country has been by this appalling murder. 2 children have lost their mother, a loving husband has lost his wife, and my heart breaks when I think of them and what they're going through. And I think the most important thing for the politicians is to remember what she was all about, which was service, community, tolerance. These are values we should all try to live by and promote in order to remember her. Look, I don't think we know why exactly this happened or what the motivation was or the rest of it, and we have to wait for the police investigation before we do that. But I think what we do know is wherever we see intolerance, hatred, division, we should try and drive it out of our communities, out of our public life. And we have to be careful that debates, yes, they can be passionate, but we have to make sure that they're not based on those things.
Has it been a rather sour debate, in your view?
It's been very passionate, and I understand that, because there are very strong and passionate views on both sides. I'll be frank, I think there have been some moments, like the Nigel Farage poster, which I think are just wrong. Wrong in fact, because it's a picture of people in the European continent from Syria and elsewhere. They're not coming to Britain. But actually just wrong in motivation, because it's an attempt to frighten people, to scare them, to divide people.
Has your side been guilty of any of that?
Well, I would say that there's nothing more positive than trying to have a growing economy and having jobs and opportunities, which is what the case for Remain is all about. I'm sure we'll come on to the economic warnings, but look...
All right, John Major called the other campaign squalid, yes? You said that the leader of ISIS would be happy if we left the EU. Are those contributions to a measured debate, either you or John Major?
Well, let me take the ISIS one. I actually think that's true. I think the terrorists that want to do us harm, they want the West to be divided. They don't want Britain and France and Germany and Belgium to work together to defeat terrorism. They'd like to see us separate from each other.
And do you think the argument about immigration is squalid, as Sir John Major said?
I'll use my own words. I think that poster was irresponsible.
Right.
I think there is an attempt to frighten people.
You, sir?
Do you think by comparing the EU referendum to ISIS, though, you're merely scaremongering rather than just portraying the facts?
I certainly wasn't comparing the referendum to ISIS, to Daesh. I was simply saying that I think one of the strongest arguments for remaining in the European Union is that we're stronger together, that we're safer together. We do face a dangerous and insecure world. And I've been your Prime Minister for the last 6 years, and I sit in those meetings, and I see that we work together to try and face down these threats, and I think we'll be stronger if we work together. Working together against terrorism, working together against Putin and his aggression in Europe, it must be better to try and stay together, to work together, rather than to be separate.
We'll move on, ma'am. One more point from you.
I have to say I found the campaigns very confusing. I don't think either side has made a very good point. And, I'm an educated young woman, and I don't know how I'm going to vote. I think both sides should feel a little bit ashamed of how they've behaved to this nation.
let's turn to aspects of the campaign. Sunita Bayani.
Is the emergency Brexit budget a punishment for Leave voters, especially since it would risk pushing the economy into a depression that would already be reeling off from the shock of Brexit?
The Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course, producing a budget which said 2p in the pound on income tax. Pensioners, triple lock no longer applied if we vote Leave.
Nobody wants to have a budget. Nobody wants to have cuts to public spending or putting up taxes. But I think this goes to the heart of the debate and the heart of the argument we need to have, which is I'm absolutely convinced that our economy will suffer if we leave. And the reason for that is today we're part of a single market of 500 million people, and that's where almost half of what we sell overseas goes. Now, if we leave this single market, if we have less good access to it, it stands to common sense that we'll have less growth, we'll have less jobs, we'll have less livelihoods for people in our country. So if that happens, you don't gain money by leaving the EU, you actually make your economy smaller, you have fewer jobs, less tax revenues, so therefore you have a big hole in your public finances. And what the Chancellor was saying is that if that happened, you have to either allow borrowing to rise, which could threaten our economy, or you have to put up taxes, or you have to cut spending. Those are, I think, some pretty fundamental truths, and it's not just the Remain side that's saying that. You've got expert after expert, the OECD, the IMF, the Bank of England, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, all independent, making this point. Are
you planning an autumn budget then,
well,
if Britain votes Leave?
If we leave, and if these experts are right, that our economy will be smaller, and we'll have lower tax revenues, there'll be no saving from leaving the EU. There'll be a cost, and we have to make up that cost in some way. Now,
but immediately, in an autumn budget?
Well, you can't leave it, because you'd find... I mean, the Institute for Fiscal Studies say that we would lose between 20 to 40 billion pounds in our public finances. So you have to either put up taxes or cut spending, or let borrowing rise. And I think, as Prime Minister, over 6 years ago, we got out of this hole of too much borrowing, an economy that wasn't growing, not creating jobs. I don't want us to go back to square one, and that's why I hope that on June the 23rd, people will recognise we're stronger in and vote to Remain.
Let's hear from some members. I just would say your close advisor, Steve Hilton, said of Number 10's forecasts, they're made up. I know, because I used to do this stuff for him.
Well, let's take this very directly. It is not simply the Treasury that are saying we'd suffer economically. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the National Institute, the Bank of England, all these bodies. And can I just make one point, David, and I promise I'll move on. You know, the Leave campaign say, let's not listen to experts. But if we're about to get into a car and drive our children on a motorway and the mechanic says the brakes don't work, the petrol gauge is faulty, the steering isn't working, we wouldn't get in the car. And I say we should listen to the experts because they're giving us a very clear message about the risk to the economy, the risk to the jobs, and the risk to the livelihoods of people in our country. And we don't have to vote for that. We instead should vote for a stronger economy, and that's voting to Remain.
Let's stick with the economy for a moment.
Sure.
With the emergency budget, as a 16-year-old, I would like to go to university. How would that affect the education and the costs of it?
Well, the good news on education is that we've uncapped the numbers who are going to our universities because we have a fee system, which means that actually successful graduates are paying for this system. They start paying back once they've earned £21,000. So we've managed to do that without a big cost to the taxpayer. But frankly, I would say if you want to go to university, almost every university, I think actually every university in the country and every Vice-Chancellor has said we are better off staying because we get so much research funding for our universities from the European Union, and they're giving a very clear message that we're better off in.
You, sir.
Why, Prime Minister, did you then say only a short time ago that Britain outside the EU would prosper and be OK? And now you're threatening a massive budget. Why?
What I said, sir, is that Britain always finds a way. And we would, of course, we would survive outside the European Union. We'd find a way. But it's my very, very clear view that it would be less good, that we would have less growth, we would have less jobs, we'd have less incomes for our families. We would suffer economically. And you can either believe the experts, and I think it's right to listen to experts, or you can take this simple view that if we've got free access to a market of 500 million people, that's where almost half of our goods and services go. Obviously, if we leave, they're not going to give us as good a deal on the outside as we get on the inside.
All right.
You're relying on experts, Prime Minister, like the new leader of the Bank of England, who couldn't even tell us exactly when interest rates would be reintroduced.
All right.
He's got it wrong 3 times.
Well, what I'd say is that when I'm thinking of buying a house, I'd listen to an expert. If I'm thinking of getting into a car, I'd listen to the mechanic. If I want to build a bridge, I want an engineer. The people in the Leave campaign are asking you, they're asking you to trust in just a sense it's going to be okay. And I don't think that's good enough for the families and the businesses of Britain on whom our country
All right.
relies.
You over there, sir.
If you support Remain campaign so passionately,
Yeah.
why give people an option for EU referendum? Why give them an option to leave?
Well, sir, I think some questions are so big that it's right they're answered by the people and not by the politicians. And frankly, we've been having an argument about Europe in our country for the last 20 years. Also, since we last had a vote, there have been quite a lot of changes to Europe, and I don't think we should be frightened of, in a democracy, the people making a decision. And I'd accept that decision, whatever it is. But I would make one point tonight. I do believe it's irreversible. I think if we vote to leave, I don't think there's any prospect of rejoining. If you were trying to rejoin, can I just make this point, and I promise I'll then take some more questions. You'd have to join the single currency, you'd have to join the Schengen no borders zone, you'd have to give up the British rebate, so I see no prospect of rejoining. So this is a final decision. You can't, as it were, jump out of the aeroplane and then try and scramble back into the cockpit hatch.
So have you got plans to, contingency plans to base, if it happens to be Brexit, what plans
Yes, of
have you
course,
got
of
to
course.
save this economy?
Well, of course, what we'd have to do is then work out, as I said to the gentleman here, we'd have to work out the right way for Britain to succeed in the future. But I'm saying to you very clearly, I think that is the worst. I think that's the worst of the 2 options.
All right.
I think it would be difficult. It would be tough.
The woman here, the scarf.
Yeah.
The country voted to leave. Would you call a general election? Because I think it's important for us to have a proper. The next step is really crucial for our country, and all the parties need to come up with a manifesto so that the people who have taken back control can actually vote the way they want the country to go forward. So that there's going to be infighting amongst the Tories, there's going to be infighting amongst the Labour Party. Really, it's time to reconcile all those differences and go forward on the basis of a decent business plan, and let the people decide where we go forward and how we go.
What I would say is that when we had the general election last year, I set out very clearly in the manifesto that we were going to hold a renegotiation, we were going to hold a referendum. It was going to be an in-out referendum. The British people would decide, and we would accept that instruction and deliver it.
Yeah,
and that's
people
exactly.
Voted for you. People voted for you on the basis of a referendum. They didn't vote for you on the basis of what would happen after the referendum.
Well, except for inevitably with the referendum, you either go one way or you go the other way.
But we didn't know what the options would be, how it would be taken
All
forward.
right. Louise Riding, let's have your question at this point. Louise Riding. Yeah. Over here. Sorry. Yes. Hold on a second.
If the public vote to leave, how can you as Prime Minister possibly remain?
If the British public, or you say when the British public?
Yes, when?
When the British public vote to leave, how can you remain? Let's stick with this
What I've said is
point.
that we had an election in 2015 and my party won that election and I was leading the party and so was re-elected as Prime Minister. I promised this renegotiation, I've carried it out, promised this referendum, we're having it, and I've said I will take and obey the instructions of the British people, and on that basis I think it's right to stay. And I also think it's right not to muddle up in this referendum the future of this politician or that politician. The question on the ballot paper is going to be very clear. Do we stay in or do we leave? In my view, remaining is the right answer for our economy, for jobs, for our safety, for the strength of our country, and it is an irreversible decision. There's no going back once you've walked through that door.
You've said that this referendum is more important than any general election. If you lost a general election, you'd be out of number 10 like that.
Yeah.
So if you lose this referendum, why won't you be out of number 10 like that?
Because I said very clearly we were going to hold a referendum, an in-out referendum, and I would accept the instructions of the British people. So I think this is very important.
Doing exactly the things you don't want to do.
Look, I think this... What I would say is, just because you hold a referendum doesn't mean you have a very strong view. I do have a strong view. Maybe it would be easier for me standing here to say, well, on the one hand, very strong arguments, on the other hand, quite strong arguments, but on balance, that's not what I think. I really do believe that we will be stronger, safer and better off in. I believe our economy will be weakened if we leave, and that's why I've spoken so frankly and so clearly, I think, throughout this referendum campaign.
But surely, if you're so confident about your view, it behoves you to say, and what's more, if I lose this referendum, I quit. Because it's not something I go along with.
The reason I think that is the wrong thing to do is we held a general election a year ago. My party won that election on the basis of holding this referendum.
Right. The woman here on the gangway.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is, with all these experts that you've got saying we should stay in, why the British public isn't more convinced? Why is Brexit in the lead?
Well, I think people have found this debate and all the facts and the figures perhaps quite confusing. I think by moments that has happened, but I would say we have 4 days to go. People need to think very carefully between now and Thursday. But I come back to this point. If all these experts who've looked at this issue come to the conclusion our economy will suffer and that there is no going back, and this will have an impact on families and jobs and livelihoods, I believe that too. And it's not just because of the experts, it's because I've talked to the car companies and they're doing a brilliant job, and our workers are doing a brilliant job making cars in Britain, and I worry about those jobs going overseas. I've talked to the people where we're making trains and aeroplanes and exporting them to Europe.
So
and
why are people
about
confused?
being out of that.
Why do you say people are confused?
Well,
do you
I
trust the people to make the decision?
Yeah, well, I do
the
trust
arguments
the
are
people.
presented, and then you say everyone's confused.
I think there's been a lot of figures
but
and
what
facts.
she means is your points haven't got across. Isn't that what you mean?
It is,
Yes.
and it's so frustrating when you really want you to get the point across that we should stay in, and it's just not getting through to people.
Well, I've got 4 days to go. I've obviously, with your entreaties, I've got to do better at getting this argument across. But to me, it comes down to quite a simple point about the economy, but it also comes to a point about what sort of country do we want to be. And I want us to be a country that does work together with others. From what I've seen in 6 years and what I've learned in 6 years, there's no problem in the world that isn't better addressed by working with your friends and your allies and your neighbours. And that's what we face today. We should be working together to grow our economies, working together to provide more jobs and opportunities for young people, working together to beat these terrorists that are trying to do us so much harm. And if we walk away and quit and leave this organisation forever, we don't take back control. We'd be outside the room while the French and the Germans and the Italians were working out, well, what are we going to do to fix our economic problems? How are we going to fight terrorists? What rules should we have for the single market? They'd be deciding the rules and regulations for our continent. And we should be there fighting. Britain doesn't quit, we fight, and that's how we win.
All right, you, sir, the respect goes on there.
The EU used to have 20% of world trade. It's now dropped to 15%. Is that a success story?
Well, sir, what's happened is you've seen the rise of countries like China and India, big economies that we need to trade with more. But European trade and European economies have grown a great amount since we joined in 1972.
It's dropped from 20 to 15%.
That's of a share of the total. And that's because of the immense rise of China.
A drop.
But dropped as a share of the total.
Yeah,
it's increased.
It's a drop.
Well, it's increased as an entity. It's increased. But let me give you. I don't want to baffle you with statistics. Let me just give one statistic. We know about two statistics. 80% of our economy. 80% of our economy is services. Things like insurance and banking and architecture and sales and advertising and the rest of it. 80%. We sell more in services today to Luxembourg than we do to the whole of India. Now, of course, we need to do better with India. We need a trade deal with India. But the idea we should cut ourselves off from our main market, I think, is economic madness. What we need to do is work to succeed in our main market, then open up the other markets.
OK, fine, you made the point. Let's move on, because I'm sure the economy will come up again and again. But to a question from June Flecknell, please.
Mr Cameron.
Hi, June.
Why in your manifesto did you say you would bring down the number of EU immigrants down to the thousands when you knew very well you couldn't control these numbers?
Well, I believe... I believe that immigration, net migration, on that scale, is the right ambition for our country. Every year, many British people and EU nationals here in Britain leave and go and work in Europe, and many Europeans come and work here. And as recently as 2008, there were actually more British and EU nationals leaving the UK than there were arriving to work. So I think we've had a very extraordinary period for the last 5 years where we've created in Britain more jobs than the rest of the European Union put together. That is now changing as the other European Union economies are starting to grow. So I think what we need to do is better control migration from outside the EU, that's more than half of the total, and then bring in the changes that I negotiated, which I think will make a big difference, because we're saying to people, if we stay in, let me just quickly do this, if we stay in, if you come and work in Britain, you can't claim unemployment benefit. If you don't get a job after 6 months, you have to leave. And if you do come and work, you've got to work here for 4 years, paying into our system before you get full access to our tax credit and our welfare system.
Is your target still 100,000?
Yes, I think that's the right ambition for Britain.
No, sorry, is it your target? Because you see, a lot of people say that your failure to hit that target is what has exacerbated the argument about immigration. Because people said, the Prime Minister promised it, it's not going to happen. Michael Gove said the other day, if we leave the EU, I can do it within a parliament.
Well, I accept that...
Do you agree with that?
No, I accept that it is very challenging controlling immigration. As I said, half of it, more than half, comes from outside the EU, and we found that quite difficult, even though we've closed down bogus colleges and all the rest of it. Inside the EU, we've had this very strong growth here, very weak growth in the rest of Europe. That is changing. But what I'd say very frankly is that there are good ways of controlling immigration, and these welfare changes, I think, are good ways. There are bad ways of controlling immigration, and that, I think, would be leaving the single market, damaging our economy, costing jobs, and hurting British working families in the process. That's not the right way to control immigration.
We've got a lot of hands up. Let's hear from some of the members of the audience. You,
I understand the importance of listening to experts, but I think that's exactly where the problem is. People become so disillusioned with the establishment, they refuse to listen to the expert. That's why 3.18 million people voted for UKIP. And I also believe, like, at the end of the day, whether we vote to leave or remain, it is people's choice. And as the government, as the Prime Minister, you should say we would do politics of hope. We should do our best, and we shouldn't have a budget that's the threaten the pensioner or other people.
All right. Let's just stick with immigration. I'll stick with immigration for a minute.
You said Europe is increasing work-wise. Spain, Greece, Italy, France have got higher unemployment than we have and no prospect of increasing jobs. Why are you telling us that Europe is increasing when it is not? Europeans come here because they see the problem at home, and yet we try and stay in Europe and not see the problems that they've got. You want to spend 5 minutes with me, I can tell you all about it.
All right, spare that till afterwards.
The facts are, you're absolutely right about the Greek economy. It's still in very great difficulty. No, the Spanish economy is now growing. The French economy is growing. The German economy is growing. That is beginning to change, and you can see that. The Irish economy grew 7% last year, more than twice as fast as we did.
All right, I want to stick with the immigration point. Who wants to actually speak to the immigration point? Yes, you with the spectacles there.
Yeah. I think that it's an only logical thing to understand that if we have absolutely no limitations on immigration from the EU, that people are obviously going to immigrate over here. We've got our public sector, we've got our NHS that's under tremendous strain at the moment. You're not doing anything to invest any kind of thing into them to make them any stronger or better, with knowing full well that if we don't put a limit on this immigration, and the only way to do that is to leave the single market, then everything is just going to get flooded. You're not doing anything to counterbalance all the immigration coming into these services.
What I'd say, let's take the health service, because it's a very important point. What I'd say is that we are putting more money into the NHS. Now, we can argue we should put even more in. Let's work how to get the growth in our economy into the NHS. But when you listen to the people in the NHS, the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Physicians, the guy Simon Stevens who runs the NHS, the trade unions who work in the NHS, they all want us to remain in a reformed European Union because they think that's better for the NHS, because a bigger economy, a better economy, a stronger economy is always better for our NHS.
But you keep saying this reformed European Union that we're a part of. Like, you still, yeah, fair enough, you've negotiated some changes that you'll be, which you say, is going to make a massive difference to the immigration. But realistically, it's not. It's not going to make a massive difference to the levels of immigration, especially considering we have other countries that are about to join the European Union.
So what do you want? What do you want to happen?
Leave the single market.
You'll just leave?
Leave the single market, negotiate our trade worldwise.
Okay.
Can I just... Can we just take a moment on this issue of let's leave and negotiate our trade arrangements with the European Union?
But in order to stop immigration, that was what she's saying.
If that's
to cut immigration.
some people think that's what we should do. Right, the best trade deal Europe's ever done is with Canada. It's taken 7 years to negotiate. It still hasn't been completed. It doesn't give full access for services. It doesn't give full access for farmers. So what we'd be looking at, no, but I think this is so important for people watching this. If we vote to leave, we are facing potentially a decade of uncertainty. 2 years to get out of the European Union, 7 years to negotiate a trade deal with the European Union, and for young people starting out on their working life, that means a whole decade of not knowing the direction in which their country's going. I think that would be a mistake for our country.
You make the point. You want to go? No. You say then, yeah. You, go on, fire away.
Is there anything fair about an immigration system that prioritises unskilled workers from within the EU over skilled workers who are coming from outside the EU?
Well, sir, we effectively have two systems. So we have a system inside the European Union where British nationals who want to go and work in Spain or Italy or France or elsewhere are able to do that, and European nationals can come and work here. And then for outside the European Union, we have a points-based system where we only take people in if they have skills, and we've got gaps in those skills. So the argument we have to make with ourselves is to think, is it really worth leaving the single market, damaging our economy, in order to try and make progress with this issue? And I don't think it is. And those Leave campaigners who say they want an Australian point-style system for inside the EU, Australia has more than twice as much net migration per head as we do. There's no silver bullet on this issue. There's absolutely no simple way of solving this
Prime
issue.
Minister, if you left the EU, there would be a silver bullet, because then you have total control over the number of people who come into this country.
First of all, first of all, you don't have control over the more than half. Over the more than half. Well, we have more than half coming from outside the EU.
Why don't you have control over that?
That's more than half. So you have to work on that. That
but you
takes
can control
time.
that.
That takes time, and as I said, that's been difficult. Inside the EU, what I'm arguing
Sorry,
is...
what do you mean when you say that's been difficult? You mean you haven't achieved it,
yes,
obviously.
well, obviously.
Why has it been difficult?
It is because lots of people want to come and study and work and live in our country. We've taken a lot of steps.
But that's your decision. You can't say it's difficult. It's your decision as Prime Minister.
No, absolutely. I'm explaining why it has been a difficult thing to do. But the real argument here is, do we want to leave the single market and damage our economy in order to try and deal with this issue? And I think that is the wrong way to go, because you're going to be cutting jobs, cutting livelihoods, harming the interests of families in our country, and that isn't what we should be doing in this debate.
We've got lots of hands up. I want to get them. I do just want to ask you one thing. Your Home Secretary, Theresa May, has said there are some changes coming up in free movement rules in the EU, and we should look for further reform in the future. Are you saying, as part of this campaign, don't worry, we're going to cut back on EU entry to this country in the way that Theresa May suggests?
What she's saying is that there's a set of reforms coming in if we stay, which we've negotiated. So there's the changes to welfare. You have
the things you've already done?
Yeah, no, they haven't come in.
But she says there'll be further reform.
I'm going to answer that. So there are welfare changes, which make a difference.
Yeah.
We've also got further changes to make sure we can throw out criminals, that we can stop people with sham marriages, that people who are third country nationals can't come in because of a marriage they've made. Those changes are coming too. We're reopening the freedom of movement.
So she's not thinking of anything that isn't already on the table?
This is an ongoing process. The more we can do, the better.
OK. Who hasn't? The man over there at the far corner there, yes.
Mr Cameron, you keep saying that you propose to stop immigrants allowing to claim benefits. Is this just a proposal, or can you enforce it, or have you got to go back to the EU to get it enforced?
Very good question. It's agreed. Yes, sir. It's agreed by the 27 other Prime Ministers and Presidents. It's part of what will become a legally binding document, and these changes are coming in. The head of the European Parliament has said that too. So these are things, they come in. If we vote yes to remain in the reformed European Union on Thursday, those proposals get put in front of the European Parliament and start to be passed straight away.
What happens if somebody vetoes you?
Well, they've all agreed they won't. This is, they've all agreed.
How can we believe that?
Well, no, this is part of a document that is a legally binding agreement. And I'm very confident, I wouldn't be standing here saying this to you, sir, if I didn't believe it. I'm very confident all of these changes will come in, and they are significant. To the lady who said, will it have an effect? Hold on, let me just quickly say this. Today, someone can come into our country, get a job, and get on top of their first year's salary £10,000 in extra benefits. Now, that will stop if we vote to remain and my changes go through, which they will. That, I believe, will have a profound effect.
Let me leave the man here in yellow pullover.
How long are these changes meant to last? The 4 years, etc., the welfare changes, how long are they going to remain in place?
They effectively last till 2028. So, if they come in... Well, by then there'll be all sorts of, I'm sure, other... That is 12 years from now. These will still be in effect.
On this? Yes, you, the woman there. Yes.
What about people with children still wanting to come to our country from the EU?
Yeah.
We would have a duty of care to those children and those families. Are you saying that they won't get benefits, they won't be able to have somewhere to live, or would we still provide the funding for those children to live in this country?
The rules would be that if people come here to work and want access to the welfare system, instead of the instant access they get now with tax credits and child tax credits and the rest of it, they'd have to work for 4 years before they got full access. That is, I think, a very significant change, and I think it goes to a
But what
deep
if they
value.
couldn't get work? What if they couldn't get any work?
This is very important.
And they've got children.
If they can't get work, and they can't support themselves, they have to go home. They do.
They have to go
That is
home.
the way. This is very
But we
important.
would
The
have a
freedom-
duty of care to those children when they came to this country.
Yes, but the freedom of movement to
Because
work...
they're children.
The freedom of movement to work is not an unqualified right. This is really important because I think people... I'm not sure we've got this across. If you come to Britain and you can't support yourself and you can't find a job, you have to go home. And that's being strengthened under our rules. And I think it's very important because it's the freedom of movement to work. It's not the freedom of movement to claim.
OK, take a question from here and then we'll move on. Yes.
Mr Cameron, you say that your policy that you've negotiated with Europe cannot be overruled. It can. So are you really, the 21st century, Neville Chamberlain, waving a piece of paper in the air, saying to the public, this is what I have. I have this promise where a dictatorship in Europe can overrule it. That simple question, yes or no, please?
What I can say to you is the other 27 Prime Ministers and Presidents have agreed it. And they know if Britain votes to remain, they will implement it. And I think, look, this is not some empire and dictatorship. We're proving... Hang on, sir. We're proving through this referendum, right, that if Britain wants to leave this organisation, we can. We are a sovereign country. We choose to join NATO or choose to join the EU. And if we choose to leave, we can leave. But let's be clear, if we do leave, that's it. We're walking out the door, we're quitting, we're giving up on this organisation, which even if we leave, will have a huge effect on our lives, on our children, on our opportunities, on our businesses. I don't think Britain, at the end, is a quitter. I think we stay and fight. That's what we should do. That's what made our country great. And that's how we'll be great in the future.
No. You've made that.
Let me say this to you.
You've made that point.
Make one more point. At my office, I sit 2 yards away from the cabinet room where Winston Churchill decided in May 1940 to fight on against Hitler, the best and greatest decision perhaps anyone's ever made in our country, right? Now, he didn't want to be alone. He wanted to be fighting with the French and with the Poles and the others. But he didn't quit. He didn't quit on Europe. He didn't quit on European democracy. He didn't quit on European freedom. We want to fight for those things today. And you can't win. You can't fight if you're not in the room.
All right.
You can't win a football match if you're not on the pitch.
All right. Well, let's turn to a question where you will be in the room if Britain remains. Michael Tyndale.
Thank you. Prime Minister, will you veto the accession of Turkey into the EU?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen for decades. So, as far as I'm concerned, that question simply doesn't arrive. I think this is the biggest red herring in this whole referendum debate, right? I can't find a single expert anywhere in the country or in Europe that thinks that Turkey's going to join the EU in the next 3 decades. Let me explain why. To join, you've got to open and close and negotiate 35 chapters. They've done 1. At this rate, they'll join in the year 3000. So this issue doesn't arise, and I really feel strongly about this because people are getting through their letterboxes leaflets from Leave saying, basically, Turkey's going to join the EU, not true. There's going to be a European army with Britain in it, not true. And we give £350 million a week to Brussels, not true. Now look, if we want to vote to leave this organisation, let's vote to leave it. But let's not do it on the basis of three things that are completely untrue.
All right, well, let's just... What you said in Turkey was, in terms of Turkish membership, I very much support that. What he's asking is, if it comes up, will you veto it?
It's not going to come up.
Well,
wait a minute.
You've said in three... I mean, it'll come up sometime. Michael Gove thinks it'll come up in our lifetimes, or his lifetime. You say it'll be 3 decades away.
I'm not going to be Prime Minister in 3 decades'
No, but what
time.
about your grandchildren? Everybody talks about their children and their grandchildren.
Well, it'll be
they will be in a world where Turkey is...
Maybe I can give
that's why he's asking about the veto.
Right. If this was going to happen in the next couple of years, I would not support it. But it's not going to. This is about 30, 40 years' time. And I'm not going to be Prime Minister in 30 or 40 years' time. It is a red herring. As I say, if people who've decided to vote Leave, obviously it's a choice, it's a referendum. But to do it on the basis of Turkey joining the EU, you'd be voting to leave an organisation to damage our economy on the basis of something that is not going to happen.
Okay.
And that would be a crazy thing to do.
Could you not veto it at this stage when the EU is talking about accelerating the process of accession? Why not just say, I just want the world to know I veto this.
Let me explain
Stop the
why.
discussion, no more talk about it.
Let me explain why. Let me explain why Britain has always been very favourable to Turkey. We want Turkey to be a Western-leaning country. We want it to be a democracy. We want it to have a rule of law. We don't want it to imprison journalists. Frankly, this is not going very well at the moment. That's why we've been positive to Turkey. But let me just say again, because for people watching at home, I don't want anyone to vote in this referendum on the basis of Turkey joining, because it's not going to happen. Just like the European army is not going to happen, just like the 350 million isn't true. I'm sure there are arguments for leaving, but those three, which are the three leading things on their leaflets, are simply not true, and it'd be a tragedy if we damaged our economy, wrecked job prospects in our country on the basis of three things that are completely untrue.
All right.
Obviously, immigration has been the most pressing issue for most people. I just wonder how much you would accept personal responsibility for austerity in the country that is fueling this, because people are concerned because they feel that there's pressure on the public services. And would you agree that's the effect of the Conservatives rather than the effect of immigration?
Well, obviously, I will defend all the things that my government's done over the last 6 years to try and get our economy back on track. And I know people will disagree with some, maybe many of the decisions, but I think it's incontrovertible that the economy is moving forward. We've created over 2 million jobs. We're beginning to see opportunities again for people in our country. And what I passionately don't want to happen, after 6 years of this and all the hard work the British people have put in, is to go back to square one. To go back to square one, to damage our economy, to put up borrowing, to see more austerity because you'd have this gap in our public finances. I think that's the worst thing for us to do to our country. We don't have to do it. We can vote for a stronger economy by voting Remain on Thursday.
But she's talking about people's earnings, and the leader of your campaign, Lord Rose, the former head of Marks and Spencer's, gave evidence and said the price of labour will frankly go up if we leave the EU. So people will be better off if we leave the EU.
That is the overwhelming majority of experts all say.
He's your leader. He's your leader.
If we leave, you see the economy suffer. And there's a very clear...
Why did he say this? Is it untrue?
If you actually look at the full context of what he said, it's much more complicated.
It's
but
not. I have it here if you want me to. I can read it to you. I can read it to you. If free movement were to end following Brexit, is it not reasonable to suppose we could see increases in wages for low-skilled workers in the UK? Lord Rose, well, if you're short of labour, the price will frankly go up, so yes.
But then he goes on to say a whole lot of other things.
He says, but that's not necessarily a good thing. I don't know
what you've got is you've got all these independent organisations saying the economy would suffer, and they're saying it for a very good reason, which is if half of your exports go to a single market of 500 million people, if you damage your access to that market, by definition, you're going to be less well off. And we're talking about the freedom of movement. I don't want the movement of British car workers' jobs to go to the continent. I don't want the movement of people making Airbus wings to go to the continent. I don't want businesses and jobs and livelihoods to suffer, as I believe they would if we vote to leave the European Union.
Yes.
The overwhelming majority of young people want to remain in the European Union. Is it fair? Well, they do. All the polls do. All the polls do. Would it be fair on them, because they're the future, if against their will, their future's changed in this referendum?
Well, I very much hope in this referendum that people will talk across generations. I absolutely agree with you, sir. I think for young people, this is a decision they're going to have to live with for all of their lives, because I think this is irreversible. I don't think there's any way back in, as I've explained. And so I hope that young people talk to parents and grandparents and discuss what this means in terms of opportunity. Because in my view, it's clear there are far more opportunities from staying, being in an organisation of 28 different countries, being able to live, to work, to study in different places in Europe, having the strength of numbers in order to drive the great trade deals we need. You know, our single market is a bigger market than the whole of China. It's a bigger, richer economy than the whole of America. We're going to get better trade deals if we stay in, and that'll be good for young people, good for jobs and good for opportunity.
Paul Rossiter. A question from Paul Rossiter, please.
Hi, Paul.
Hi. Why do we have to keep subsidising poorer EU countries through our ever-increasing contribution when the NHS and certain UK industries are more deserving of these funds?
Okay, and we've only got a minute or two left, and you would agree that the figure is
the good news is
£163 million a week,
the EU budget is going down because of the deal that I did.
£8.5 billion a year, though, just to get people...
Yeah, but the point is, David, there's no saving from leaving. If you leave and your economy is smaller, and you've got fewer people in work and less taxes, there'd be a cost to leaving, and that is not just my view, that is what all of these economists are saying. So, again, people who vote believing there's going to be a dividend from leaving are wrong. We're going to lose money if we leave. Now, you ask about the contributions we make.
Poorer countries.
We're in a single market where you've got some countries that suffered under communism.
How many European countries contribute into the EU budget, and how many take?
Measure
that when we first joined in 1972.
Well, France,
and today
yes.
we give to a lot more than we did then.
Well, France used to be a net beneficiary. It's now a net contributor. So Britain, France, Italy, Germany, we all pay in more than we get out. But my argument, and this will be crucial when people vote on Thursday, is we get more back in terms of jobs and growth than we put in. And that is not just my view. All the people who've looked at this say, far from there being a saving from leaving, there'd be a cost to leaving. And that's why there were the proposals for the budget last week.
OK. I'll take one more point. You. Be quick if you would.
Surely the deal that you've put on the table, Prime Minister, is just a starting point for us. This isn't. It's not black and white. This is the deal that's on the table at the moment. But surely you'd be looking for further reform as you go through Parliament to take to the EU on things like principle of freedom of movement and other issues that are obviously quite sensitive and have come up in this campaign.
No, well, where you're absolutely right is that if we stay, we get reform and we can work for more reform. If we leave, reform is over. That's it. We are out, we've quit, we've walked away. And Britain does have a special status. Our membership is not like anybody else's. We're not voting on the basis of, do you want Italian membership or French membership? We're out of the euro, but we keep the pound. We're in the single market, but we kept our borders and we don't have the Schengen no borders system. We're now out of an ever closer union. This is a special status, and we should be working to enhance that. Yeah. But if we vote to get out, if we vote to quit, we lose it forever.
And Question Time doesn't have any special status tonight because we've got to make way for the football. So that ends this special edition.
I've been